My name is Dominique Avery, and I'm delighted to welcome you to Can We Talk, a show which gives me an opportunity to have a wide-ranging conversation with just one interesting person, usually a Simsbury resident. Today, my guest is Maria Capriola. She's Simsbury's first ever town manager. Many of you have already met her at some public events, or perhaps watched her on SCTV when she gives the town manager's report at the Board of Selectmen's meetings. But I thought this show would give us all an informal opportunity to get to know a little bit more about her and her background. Maria, thank you so much for coming and to talk with me. As I mentioned, I usually interview for this particular show a Simsbury resident, and I know I heard you were moving to town, but I don't know if you actually have. Have you moved?
That's correct. I did move. My husband and I moved here with our 3-year-old daughter in the middle of January, a day after the snowstorm. So it made for an interesting move with a toddler, but it's great. We live over on Shaw Drive, which is a dead-end street off of Lawton, which is off of Old Meadow Plain, and we really love our neighborhood so far and love our new home.
That's terrific. Yeah, well, I don't know whether other people know that. I'm breaking news for myself here. I've also read that you're not originally from Connecticut, and so I'd like to like you to talk a little bit about where you're from, where you were born, and what brought you to Connecticut.
Sure. So I grew up in Bennington, Vermont. And most of my family is still there. Bennington is in the southwestern part of the state. And originally I came to Connecticut to be a student at the University of Connecticut. That's where I obtained my bachelor's degree, and I stayed at UConn for my master's degree. I have a master's degree in public administration. So I've actually spent most of my adult life in Connecticut. I worked for the town of Mansfield for about 11 years. I worked there for an additional 2 years when I was in graduate school, and now I am here. So between my time at UConn and my time working in Connecticut, I have spent most of my adult life here in Connecticut.
But I did read that after UConn, you didn't initially stay in Connecticut, and from what I've read, the Board of Selectmen must clearly have thought you were very qualified because you did a bunch of other things and were in other places.
That's correct. So I've had what I think is a really interesting journey to becoming a town manager. And I was incredibly fortunate as a very young person. My very first summer home from college, I interned in the town of Bennington, where I grew up, and it was a council manager form of government. So that was my first exposure to what a town manager is, what they do, and I just fell in love with the form of government. And I loved helping the citizens and helping them try to resolve their problems. And I just got the local government bug. So when I was in graduate school, I worked for the town manager's office in Mansfield. But after graduate school, I took a management fellowship position with the city of Savannah, Georgia. So that was a really
big change.
It was a wonderful growth opportunity for me, both personally and professionally, because I had spent my entire life in small New England towns. And this was a large urban center in the Southeast. And so that was just a great experience. I ended up staying on and also served as a management analyst in the research and budget department for the city of Savannah for a number of years. And then my husband and I were just really missing our family, again, being native New Englanders. And so I took a position with the city of Newburyport, Massachusetts, and stayed there for a bit, and then ultimately went back to Mansfield. And that's sort of how we got back to Connecticut.
So when you went back to Manchester, where you went to school, did you, I'm interested in finding out what kind of a community Manchester is, because it's really a college town. So, and sort of if you could compare and contrast, for an exam question,
Sure.
Simsbury and Manchester. I'm really curious as to how, I don't know much about how Manchester's run.
Sure. So Mansfield is actually about...
Oh, did I say Manchester? Yeah, excuse me.
That's okay.
Mansfield, thank you.
Yeah, so Mansfield is about the same size population-wise as Simsbury. It's around 25,000 people. But what's really interesting is a very large percentage of the population are young people between the ages of 18 and 22. And we have had a very large transient population there. So folks who are just coming and living in the community, say for a 4 or 5 year period, and then often moving along. And so we had usually 2 months during the summer that were very quiet, and we called it our year-round population. And our year-round population was closer to 15,000 people. So during the summer months, the community just had a much kind of smaller community feel to it. It was as a blend of suburban neighborhoods, rural neighborhoods. But while I was there, there was the construction of Store Center, which was an urban downtown, and that was built from the ground up. So for folks who might remember visiting Mansfield, say 10, 15 years ago, prior to Store Center, there was no downtown. And with the construction of Store Center, there was a really wonderful, vibrant urban downtown. So it was sort of a nice blend of all three types of neighborhoods.
So my daughter actually went to UConn. I think she is maybe 2 years younger than you.
Oh, okay.
But the Store Center was not there when she was there.
Yeah.
And it was right down the street. I think she was in one of those dorms that was right next door. I forget what they were called.
Oh, that's neat. Maybe Shippey or Buckley.
Yeah, Shippey.
Oh, I lived in
Shippey.
Shippey for a long time.
Yeah, she was, I think her freshman year was in Shippey.
Oh, that's great.
That's sort of odd. So, okay, so now you're in Simsbury, and you've
Yes.
actually lived here since
Yes.
January. So it's got to be a little bit different than Mansfield.
It is. One of the things that is so neat here, again, is having a true year-round population. And so it's just been a great opportunity getting to meet folks in the community, getting acclimated here. I've just found the community to be so welcoming to both myself and my husband and my daughter. And we're just really happy to be here and finding that we're adjusting well.
So, given that Mansfield has so much of a college population, is there a difference? Do you notice a difference in volunteerism and community spirit, community involvement between the two communities?
Sure. So one of the things I think that the two communities share, we have here as well as in Mansfield, a very engaged citizenry who are very generous with their time and their energy and their resources. And that was one of the things about Simsbury that I was really excited about, is that I was coming out for visits during the recruitment process and just really enjoyed my meetings with community members, and was just really impressed with how much people seem to genuinely care about the community here, and that they were contributing members. And so I've just, again, been really impressed with how engaged folks are and how generous they are with their time.
So you're our first town manager. We've made a huge switch from going from a person who's elected, who is a regular person who lives in town, to a professional. How do you think, well, first, describe your work as compared to the first selectman now.
Sure, that's a great question. Oftentimes I compare it to how you might have a board of directors with a corporation and they oversee a chief executive officer. So I'm essentially the chief executive officer for the town. So I'm hired by the Board of Selectmen to carry out the day-to-day operations of the town. So making sure that the organization is running smoothly, that our resources are being allocated in an efficient and effective way. So again, sort of those responsibilities for the day-to-day operations rest with me. With the form of government, the policy body is the Board of Selectmen and the First Selectman. So they are a legislative body. They're responsible for setting policy direction. And oftentimes with the form of government, it's referred to as that policy and administration dynamic. So I'm responsible for administrative functions, and our legislative body, the Board of Selectmen, is responsible for setting policy.
So let's go back.
Sure.
Just sort
Thank you.
of a specific example of that, because that sounds very theoretical, but can you give me a what if? Or
Sure. So, in terms of the day-to-day operations, some good examples of the work that I do would be supervising staff, managing resources. For the Board of Selectmen, they would be setting policy in terms of vision for the community. So right now, a topic that there's been some conversation around is economic development. Mm-hmm. And they've established a subcommittee or a work group, if you will, to really look at that issue. So they would be providing the policy guidance to me in terms of, again, community vision, what they would like to see executed. And then my job would be to implement and execute that vision for them.
So I actually attended one of those hearings.
Yes.
and spoke, but I'm going to go a little far afield now.
Sure.
You have had a lot of experience in a lot of different places. Can you offer any opinion at this level about policy, about what other communities have done as far as economic development is, or is that not allowed because you're...
Sure. So I think it's important when we're setting a vision for what we're comfortable with as a community for economic development to make sure that we're also being consistent with our plan of conservation and development. But again, making sure that I think that it's what this community feels comfortable with. Some communities, they would like to see no development. Other communities would like to see a lot of development. Some would like to see sort of transit-oriented development. Others might like to see sort of large retail stores. Others might want more industrial types of development.
No large retail stores here.
Exactly.
I can tell you that.
Exactly. So it's really what the community's vision is for economic development, and that's something right now that the Board of Selectmen is trying to work through, again, to help give me that guidance so I can help them implement that vision.
So when you started in January, you were faced right off the bat with the need to replace the police chief, the finance director, and a new Parks and Rec director.
Right.
That's a lot.
It is.
Right off the bat. We're recording this on May 22nd, and just yesterday I read that you actually hired, the police chief was sworn in last week or the week before, and now you've hired a finance director, and it's someone you know quite well, I understand.
Correct. So our incoming finance director was the accounting manager and treasurer for the town of Mansfield, where I had worked previously. We're really excited to have her on board. She has a solid accounting and auditing background. She was formerly an auditor with Bloom Shapiro.
What's her name?
Amy Merriweather. And she's been providing financial management services in a shared services model. So in addition to the town, she was also providing financial management services to the Mansfield Board of Education and Regional School District 19, as well as another small amount of other agencies. So really excited to have her on board.
So you are, as the town manager, you're sort of the human resource officer too, right?
Exactly. So my office is also responsible for human resources administration. So that includes items such as recruiting, employee development, employee benefits administration, labor relations, so things like negotiating contracts with our unions.
So when you were looking for the new finance director, did you interview them first, and then did they get interviewed by the Board of Finance and Board of Selectmen? How did it work?
Sure. So I did my best to structure an inclusive recruitment. It's really important to me when we hire a department head that the person is ultimately going to be a good fit for the organization, a good fit for the department, and a good fit for the community. We also have some unique charter language here in terms of the appointment process for approximately a half a dozen of our department heads. And with that charter language, I need to bring a preferred candidate to a number of boards. So, for example, in the case of the finance director, I had to bring my preferred candidate recommendation to the Board of Finance, and then ultimately the Board of Selectmen is the appointing authority. So, knowing that, I thought it was very important to, again, have a very inclusive recruitment process for the police chief and director of finance and director of culture, parks, and rec. And so we, for all three of those positions, we used a similar model. And we had a first round where we screened a number of candidates. And on the first round, we had two panels that interviewed folks. We had an internal panel of stakeholders, and we had external professionals in the field who also interviewed the candidates. And we rated them, based on their interview performance and skills and abilities and things of that nature. So from that, we narrowed it down to a group of finalists. And we brought finalists back for a full second day, and stakeholder interviews with the department head team, members of the various boards or committees that would be involved, some members of the Board of Selectmen, the departmental staff that they would be supervising. And we also had individuals complete writing assessments and had them conduct, a number of the finalists we had conduct something called a DISC assessment, which essentially it's evaluating your characteristics and traits and how they affect your leadership style and your work style. So we had finalists go through a pretty intense process.
I can see that you had an influence on the process, because I think
Yes.
it was probably very different than it had been earlier. I was fascinated by something you said earlier about starting at UConn and then sort of spending some time in Bennington in the town manager's office or the first selectman's office. As a very young person,
Yes.
that you got interested in government. I'm pretty interested in government too, but it didn't happen for me until I was in my mid-20s. So, was there a family interest or your parents, or what was it?
What's actually interesting, I don't come from a family of folks who are in public service, so I'm a bit of an anomaly. I just, in high school, I started to become very interested in government and civics. And when I first went away to UConn, I thought, I think I'd like to do something in public service, but I'm not really sure what. And so my first summer home, I took a walk down to our local town offices and introduced myself and said, I'm trying to figure out what I might like to do in government, if there are any opportunities for me to volunteer or intern here this summer. I'd be more than happy and willing to do so. And I lucked out because they had a staff member who was going out on a leave of absence just for the summer, and they needed a secretary, to somebody to come in and fill in as a secretary. And so essentially that's what I did for the summer. I helped support the building and community and planning development departments. And I was also answering the main phone line. So whenever citizens were just calling town hall and had a question and needed to be directed somewhere. And so it was that first experience where I had the exposure to the form of government, and it just really stuck with me all these years later, and here I am.
So that's interesting, but you've never had any interest in the political side.
Correct. Yeah.
So interesting. So you mentioned earlier that you moved here with
Okay.
your 3-year-old and your husband?
Yes.
And so I can imagine that you are having evening meetings and you have a 3-year-old at home. How do you manage both of those things?
Oh, that's such a great question. I'm actually very fortunate. My husband is a stay-at-home dad since we've had Charlotte. Terry and I have actually been together since high school. So we have been together for a very long time. And he has just been a great partner and has been so incredibly supportive of my journey to becoming a town manager. And I love my work so much, and I'm very passionate about it. But my work is also very time consuming, and it just requires a very significant commitment. And so when we decided to have Charlotte, we had a lot of conversations around quality of life for ourselves and what our growing family was going to become. And we made the decision for him to stay home with her. And it's worked out really beautifully for our family.
That's interesting. Well, because somebody has to take care of the child.
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely.
So I think you just mentioned something about energy and passion. I mean, clearly you have energy and passion. I've stopped by a few times, and you're always busy. How is the town taking to this, or even town employees taking to this full-time, energetic, passionate town manager? Is the transition going well, do you think?
I think the transition is going very well. I've been so grateful to people. They have been, again, staff members, community members, Board of Selectmen members. Folks have just been so incredibly kind and welcoming. I'm learning about the community, the organization, so I have lots of questions, and people are terrific and have been a great resource for me, and they're helpful, and they're helping me get information. So genuinely, most people have just seemed really supportive of me and supportive of trying to help make the transition successful. And I've just been very grateful and appreciative of how just welcoming and kind and just gracious everyone has been to me during the transition.
So you, for instance, Lisa Hefner was the previous first selectman who basically ran the town for several
Yes.
years. So I imagine you've been chatting with her and...
I have a bit. Now she's on the Board of Finance,
Right.
so I've tended to see her quite a bit
Right.
through the budgeting process and hiring a finance director.
That's my next question. Right. So that is another one of questions. The first thing that happened is our budget process,
Yes.
and that hit you right away. So you must have needed some help with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So from the time I started work to the time that my budget was due to the Board of Selectmen, I had 4 weeks. So I had 4 weeks to get not only acclimated to the organization and
Up
my
to
new
speed,
position,
right.
but to prepare an operating and capital budget for them. I'm very fortunate. I had an excellent finance director, Sean Kimball, who had served the community for a number of years.
And I just read he moved to Hampton as town manager.
To Cheshire as town
right.
manager, yes. So he was just incredibly helpful. And Melissa Appleby, my deputy town manager, also was just very, very helpful with the budgeting process. Melissa and myself and Sean actually all graduated from the same MPA program at UConn, and they have a real strength in public budgeting and finance. And so I was so very fortunate to have such a skilled budgeting team in place when I arrived to really help get me up to speed and again to help me prepare a budget in such a tight turnaround.
Yeah, and I also heard that you're going to institute some other ways of doing the budget next year, sort of trickle down. I'm sort of on a committee where sometimes a budget is necessary, and I heard that things are going to be different next year, right?
Yes, so Melissa and I are hoping to introduce some changes, in particular to the budgeting document, to incorporate GFOA best practices. And GFOA is the Professional Association for Public Finance Officers, so it's the Government Finance Officers Association. And they have a number of best practices for information and budget documents, because a budget document isn't just about numbers, it's also about communicating policy, and it's also an operations guide. And so in the upcoming budget cycle, we're really hoping to work on making some improvements to the budget document to help, again, just help communicate and articulate some of those policy and sort of operational vision that we have.
This is a little far afield, and if you don't want to answer it, please say don't. But did I read that Mansfield, right?
Yes.
That they wanted to hire you as a full-time manager there, and you said no?
That is correct.
Sorry.
That's okay. I just became incredibly energized about this community on my visits. I had been in Mansfield for a long time and was at a point that I was thinking about, do I want to stay? Do I want to perhaps think about a new opportunity? And as I was moving through the recruitment process here in Simsbury, my husband and I made a number of visits, and we made some visits with our daughter, and we just quickly fell in love with it here, and we felt so at home and so welcome. And he and I have lived in a number of places for my positions, all along the East Coast, and we were so comfortable here, and the resources that are available, the amenities, and we just thought to ourselves, what an incredible place to raise our daughter. And we really just quickly fell in love with it. And so when I received the offer, I was incredibly honored and excited, and decided to make the move.
So that's a really good answer for the town of Simsbury on our TV station, but I happen to agree. I mean, my husband and I also moved here and loved it. When we were looking for houses, we looked in, I don't know, we looked at 100 houses all over the place, and we fell in love, and it is an extraordinary community. So you've worked in Mansfield, Savannah, Georgia,
Yes.
Vermont, Newburyport, all of those communities. Are there things that we here in Simsbury can learn from those communities?
Sure. So one of the items that I'm working on with my deputy town manager are, and this is not an exciting or flashy topic, but a lot of policies and procedures. So working on standardizing how we do, things. Also looking at modernizing our processes. So we're currently looking at, again, these aren't probably flashy, exciting topics, but making more things available online, such as more payments online. We're looking at modernizing different processes around our financial management software. So we're looking at a lot of process improvement at the moment, as well as policies and procedures, just implementing them and getting them in place.
So yeah, we've been very fortunate to have some very competent people serve as first selectmen, but they're not professional town managers, right? So I think they've done an incredible job. But I actually, didn't mean to hit my microphone. I personally was not in favor of switching to a town manager form of government, because I thought, if, all of those who volunteer and do things, if we feel like there's somebody in charge, then we'll be less likely to volunteer. But to have you move here, I mean, I'm extraordinarily impressed. And I think it sounds to me like you're doing all the right things, and you have the enthusiasm for the community that I was worried we would miss with a professional town manager. But clearly, you moved here for a reason. I mean, that answer that you gave me about Mansfield was a perfect answer.
Thank you. It really is, I think, quite special here. And my husband and daughter are just in love with the town, and they are just so happy to be here as well. My daughter, it's really sweet. She loves to go to the Simsbury Public Library, and she has to go at least once a week, or she's very unhappy with us, and she likes to go on Wednesdays. That's her day for the library. But she loves the library, and she loves the playgrounds. She's taking ice skating lessons. There's just so much for her to do.
Have you been to Flaminck Farm yet?
She loves the farm.
I mean,
she loves the farm.
My 4-year-old grandson, he comes, we have to go to the farm, and it's just down the street, and it's like the
Yes.
most important thing. First word he ever learned to read was backwards eggs. Right?
Yes,
So-
yeah, and another thing that's just so terrific here, there's so many trails and just outdoor amenities, and she's a kid who loves to be outside. She loves to climb trees and walk and play in the dirt and collect rocks, and so being here with all the outdoor amenities, it's just been a great fit for her and my husband and myself.
So just on the economic development front, just to go back to the previous question about the things that these other communities are doing, and I know you're not supposed to express yourself, sort of on ideas, but are there things that those other communities are doing as far as economic development is concerned that Simsbury could be paying better attention to?
Sure. So
It's my personal interest. Right?
Sure. I think the Store Center project is a really neat project. As a community, Mansfield tended to not want large-scale industry. They didn't want big box stores. It's just not really, as a community, what they wanted. They also wanted to preserve sort of some of their agricultural roots. So at the same time, though, they knew that they wanted some development and they wanted to increase the grand list in a responsible way. And so this concept of Store Center was that it's in a very, very compact development. So it's not using a lot of land, but that it's also a walkable downtown and it's mixed use. So there are shops and there are restaurants on the bottom level of most of the buildings, medical offices, things of that nature. And the upper levels are apartments.
Right.
And then part of the development also included owner-occupied condos and townhouses. And so we were able to create, again, a very walkable downtown. Folks can get to the grocery store, they can get to the pharmacy. And what we're really finding is that a lot of millennials, that's the type of development that they want to live in. They don't want to have to drive in their cars. They don't want to have to maintain a house. They don't want to have to maintain a yard. And it was really quite amazing just to see Store Center blossom once it was officially opened.
Yeah, so I mean that's one of our problems. I just see we have just about a minute left as we have these three sort of centers and nothing connecting them. But it's an interesting observation. Well, we'll see what happens.
Yes.
So our time is up, Ariane.
Wow, that was fast.
Thank you so much for this interesting conversation, and
Thank
I
you.
think Simsbury is very lucky to have you as a town manager. Thanks to the staff here at SCTV for their help in getting the show on the air. And finally, thank you for joining us. If you missed any part of this show, you can always watch it online at simsburytv.org.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.